My name is Liam, and if there is one thing in this universe I value above world peace, it is a solid, uninterrupted 8 hours of sleep. Unfortunately, as the Omega husband of Julian, Wall Street's golden boy and a man who treats his public image like a religion, sleep has been a luxury I haven't seen in months. Tonight was supposedly a joyous occasion. We were at a ludicrously expensive hotel in Manhattan, celebrating the 1-month milestone of our son Noah. The grand ballroom was a sea of crystal chandeliers, flowing champagne, and the suffocating scent of expensive perfumes mixed with the arrogant pheromones of New York's elite. Everyone who was anyone was here, air-kissing my cheeks and congratulating me on securing such a powerful, devoted alpha. Honestly, I just wanted to crawl under one of the buffet tables and take a nap. My philosophy in life has always been simple: be a salted fish, lie flat, do nothing, and let the current carry you. I had perfectly curated my image as the docile, quiet, and slightly airheaded Omega wife so Julian would leave me alone to lounge in our penthouse. Leaving the nanny in charge of a peacefully sleeping Noah in the VIP nursery upstairs, I decided to sneak away for a quick 20-minute power nap. The private lounge down the hall seemed like the perfect sanctuary. No music, no flashing cameras, no pretentious investors asking me about my postpartum fitness routine. I pushed the heavy oak door open slightly, ready to claim the velvet sofa, but my beloved nap was violently stolen from me. Instead of an empty room, I was greeted by the sight of my husband Julian, pinning Caleb against the edge of a mahogany billiards table. Caleb, Julian's childhood best friend, the guy who practically lived in our guest room and constantly looked at me like I was a tragic, uneducated charity case. "We shouldn't be doing this," Caleb whimpered, though his hands were aggressively tangled in Julian's custom Tom Ford suit, pulling him closer. "Liam is right out there." "Forget Liam," Julian growled, his voice thick with that primal alpha command that used to give me butterflies but now just sounded like a bad voiceover in a cheap soap opera. "He's boring. He's always tired. When I'm with you, Caleb, I actually feel alive." I stood frozen by the door. In a normal story, this is the part where the fragile Omega bursts into tears, drops a champagne glass, and runs away into the rainy night, completely shattered. But me, I just felt a profound, overwhelming sense of annoyance. Really, I thought, staring at Caleb's hands on my husband. I gave up my nap for this cliché. My blood didn't run cold, it boiled with the sheer, unadulterated rage of a severely sleep-deprived person whose bedtime had just been cancelled. I didn't shed a single tear. The quiet, lazy salted fish was dead. The venomous, sharp-tongued Liam was fully awake. I quietly pulled the door shut and walked back to the ballroom. I timed it perfectly. By the time I reached the main stage, Julian had already fixed his tie, slipped out the back door of the lounge, and was standing at the podium. He looked like the picture-perfect CEO, raising a glass to the crowd of 200 guests. Caleb was standing off to the side, dabbing his eyes with a napkin, playing the supportive best friend. "I want to thank you all for coming," Julian announced smoothly into the microphone, his deep voice echoing through the grand hall. "Fatherhood has been the greatest blessing of my life, and I couldn't have done it without my beautiful, devoted husband Liam." "Oh, you definitely could have, considering how much help you've been getting on the side," I said, stepping up onto the stage and smoothly plucking the microphone right out of his hand. The entire ballroom went dead silent. The piano player stopped mid-chord. Julian blinked, his charismatic smile freezing into a mask of pure confusion. "Liam, honey, what are you doing?" I tapped the microphone, thump thump. "Is this on? Great. Hi everyone. Sorry to interrupt this masterclass in creative fiction, but I have a minor correction to make to my husband's speech." Julian's eyes darted nervously to the crowd. "Liam, you're tired." "I am tired, Julian. I am so unbelievably tired," I agreed, my voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. I turned to face the sea of shocked billionaires and socialites. "But I'm mostly tired of your absolute garbage taste. If you're going to cheat on me on the day of our son's party, Julian, could you at least pick someone who doesn't smell like cheap green tea and desperation?" I pointed directly at Caleb's, who instantly turned the color of a bruised plum. Gasps ripped through the audience. Cameras flashed. "Caleb, really?" I mocked, leaning into the mic. "I know Wall Street is going through a tough quarter, but I didn't realize we were cutting costs on our mistresses too. The man wears loafers with no socks in winter, Julian. Have some self-respect." "Liam, shut up," Julian hissed, his alpha pheromones flaring in a desperate attempt to force me into submission. It felt like a warm breeze against my absolute apathy. "Save the pheromones, buddy. You're just making the room smell like a wet dog." I deadpanned. I reached down to my left hand and grabbed the massive 5-carat diamond ring he had proposed with. With one swift, practice motion, I yanked it off my finger. "Consider this my official resignation from the circus," I said loudly. I threw the ring. I didn't just toss it, I pitched it like a Major League Baseball pitcher. The heavy diamond hit Julian squarely in the center of his forehead with a loud, incredibly satisfying smack. He stumbled backward, clutching his head as a red mark instantly bloomed on his flawless skin. The crowd was in absolute pandemonium. People were shouting, Caleb was hyperventilating, and Julian's mother looked like she was about to faint into the caviar tower. I handed the microphone to a paralyzed waiter standing near the stage. I stretched my arms, letting out a long, exaggerated yawn that was completely genuine. "Well, that was exhausting," I muttered to no one in particular. I walked off the stage, parting the sea of dumbfounded guests like Moses. I headed straight for the stairs to get Noah. Let Julian and his little green tea handle the media fallout. I had a baby to cuddle and a very important date with my pillow. Do not disturb. The morning after the party, I woke up in my old Brooklyn apartment at 11:00 a.m. It was a glorious, uninterrupted sleep, only slightly marred by the fact that my phone had accumulated 47 missed calls from Julian and a dozen frantic texts from his PR team. I ignored them all, rolled over, and ordered an obscenely large bacon, egg, and cheese sandwich on DoorDash. I had priorities, and dealing with my soon-to-be ex-husband's existential crisis wasn't one of them. Noah was happily gnawing on a teething ring in his portable crib, blissfully unaware that his fathers were currently the top trending topic on Twitter under the hashtag Wall Street Wet Dog. However, there was one pressing issue I couldn't ignore. Every time my phone buzzed with Julian's name, the mating mark on the nape of my neck throbbed. The Omega biology is a cruel, outdated operating system. It was trying to force me to care about the distress of an alpha who wore too much hair gel and slept with a guy who thought sockless loafers were acceptable winter attire. Disgusting. "We need to get this parasitic Bluetooth connection severed," I muttered to Noah, who blew a spit bubble in agreement. By 2:00 p.m., I was sitting in the dimly lit basement clinic of Dr. Elias Thorne. Elias wasn't your standard, sterile Upper East Side physician. He was an underground specialist in Greenpoint who looked like he hadn't slept since 2015 and drank black coffee straight from a French press. He was also the only doctor in New York willing to perform an unconsented bond severance without lecturing me about preserving the family unit. "You understand the risks?" Liam, Elias asked, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses as he prepared the incredibly ominous-looking syringe. "Severing a 2-year-old bond, especially after childbirth, is agonizing. It's like pulling a deep-rooted tooth without anesthesia, but the tooth is attached to your nervous system. Your alpha will feel it too. He'll likely experience severe physical trauma." I took a bite of the bacon sandwich I had brought with me. "Doc, if you're trying to talk me out of this by telling me Julian is going to suffer, you're really misreading my vibe right now. Can we speed this up? I have a nap scheduled for 4. Elias sighed, a sound that suggested he dealt with too many dramatic omegas, though probably none quite as apathetic as me. He wiped my neck with alcohol. "Bite down on the leather strap. This is going to hurt." He wasn't lying. The moment the chemical compound entered my bloodstream, targeting the pheromonal link, my vision whited out. Fire clawed its way up my spine, settling at the base of my skull where Julian's mark lay. It felt as if someone was dragging a rusty serrated knife through my soul. My body seized. I tasted copper as I bit down hard. Through the collapsing bond, I felt a sudden, violent wave of panic and excruciating pain that didn't belong to me. It was Julian. He was feeling the tether snap. The sensation of his terror and agony rushing into my mind made me want to vomit. So, I did what any rational, highly annoyed person would do. I used the dying embers of our connection to project one last, crystal clear emotion directly into his brain. "Have fun paying alimony, loser." And then, with a sound like shattering glass in my mind, the bond snapped. I collapsed forward, gasping for air, drenched in cold sweat. My lungs burned, and my muscles trembled so violently I could barely sit up. "Breathe, Liam, it's over," Elias said, quickly checking my vitals. "You survived, but you're going to need rest. Your body just went through immense trauma." I spat out the leather strap, wiped a trickle of blood from the corner of my mouth, and reached for the other half of my sandwich. Honestly, the worst part was tasting his cheap cologne through the bond right at the end. Did the DoorDash guy bring the extra hash browns? While I was enjoying my post-surgery carbs, Julian was apparently having a much worse afternoon. According to the tabloids, the CEO of Blackwood Financial had collapsed mid-meeting, clutching his chest and screaming, before being rushed to Mount Sinai Hospital. I felt a fleeting second of pity for the paramedics who had to listen to him whine. The next few days were a masterclass in audacity. While I spent my time teaching Noah how to hold his own bottle so I wouldn't have to, efficiency is key, Caleb, the green tea himself, was busy on Instagram. He posted a teary-eyed selfie holding Julian's hand in the hospital bed, captioned "True love endures all storms. Healing my alpha after an unprovoked, malicious attack by an unstable ex. Hashtag stand by my man. Hashtag new beginnings." I snorted, liking the photo from my burner account before leaving a comment. "Looks like he needs a sponge bath, Caleb. Make sure you use cold water. It helps with the swelling of his ego." Caleb wasn't just playing nurse, he was actively launching a smear campaign. He hinted heavily on his stories that he had a powerful new benefactor backing him and Julian, a billionaire who saw the truth and was going to help them crush me in court. Caleb posted pictures of shiny new black cards and a sprawling Hamptons estate, bragging about his impending ascension to high society. My brother Archer called me in a panic on Thursday morning. "Liam, have you seen the news? Julian has officially filed for sole custody of Noah. He's citing your unstable mental state, your unemployment, and the reckless, illegal bond severance as proof you're an unfit parent. They're trying to leave you with nothing." I was lying on my sofa, a cucumber slice over each eye, letting a Korean sheet mask do its magic. "Archer, lower your voice. You're stressing out my pores. Are you even listening to me?" Julian hired Malcolm Price, the most ruthless family lawyer in Manhattan. Caleb is parading around saying his new sugar daddy is going to bury you in legal fees. "Liam, you don't have a job. You've been playing house for 2 years." I peeled one cucumber slice off and stared at the ceiling. They wanted to play the money game. They wanted to call me a broke, unemployed housewife. I let out a long, heavy sigh. Being a salted fish was supposed to be easy. You lie flat. You do nothing. You stay out of trouble. But if these idiots were going to threaten my custody of Noah, and more importantly, interrupt my peace and quiet, I couldn't just lie here anymore. "Fine," I grumbled, pushing myself off the sofa. "I guess playtime is over." I walked over to the closet, ignoring the designer clothes Julian had bought me, and reached into the dark, dusty corner behind the shoe rack. I pulled out a heavy, scuffed Pelican case. Inside was my old, modified laptop, covered in faded Hello Kitty and anime stickers. I opened the lid. The screen flickered to life, illuminating my face in the dim room. It was time to remind Julian Blackwood exactly whose algorithms were running his precious financial empire. If there is one thing I have learned about modern society, it is that people absolutely love a beautifully filtered tragedy. By Monday morning, I was officially the villain of New York high society. I discovered this while lying upside down on my sofa, eating dry Cheerios straight out of the box, and watching Noah try to eat his own foot. My phone had been vibrating so relentlessly on the coffee table that it had slowly shimmied its way off the edge and fallen onto the rug. When I finally bothered to pick it up, I saw that Caleb had been very busy over the weekend. He hadn't just taken to Instagram, he had launched a full-scale digital crusade. His latest post was a carousel of carefully curated aesthetic suffering. The first picture was a candid shot of Julian looking out a window, clutching a glass of scotch, his jaw set in a perfect angle of heartbroken alpha. The second was a picture of Caleb's hand resting on Julian's shoulder. And the third was the masterpiece. It was a selfie of Caleb standing on the sweeping balcony of a massive, aggressively modern Hamptons estate. In his manicured fingers, he was casually holding a matte black Centurion card, the account numbers conveniently blurred, but the sheer weight of the flex crystal clear. The caption read, "When one door closes, a golden gate opens." So grateful for the incredibly powerful benefactor who saw through the lies of an unstable ex and decided to sponsor our truth. Justice is coming, and it has a Hamptons zip code. Hashtag healing. Hashtag billionaire backing. Hashtag protect Noah. I stared at the screen, a single Cheerio suspended halfway to my mouth. "Noah," I said, pointing the screen at my son, who babbled happily. "Look at this. He's trying to flex a borrowed black card on the internet. Do you know how tacky that is? We are definitely raising you with better taste." The comments section was a war zone, but mostly, it was a pity party for Julian and Caleb. People were calling me a jobless leech, a gold digger who went crazy postpartum, and a psychopath for illegally severing a sacred mating bond. The hashtag cancel Liam was actually trending locally. I didn't feel angry. I just felt a profound sense of second-hand embarrassment. Did he really think a house in the Hamptons was the peak of human achievement? I clicked on the comment box. I didn't write an essay defending myself. I didn't post screenshots of Julian's infidelity. I just left one simple comment from my verified account. Nice house, Caleb. Make sure you vacuum the carpets thoroughly and maybe wipe down the baseboards. The new owner is allergic to dust and desperation. I hit send, tossed my phone back onto the rug, and closed my eyes to resume my nap. 10 minutes later, the loud, aggressive buzzing of my intercom ruined my peace. I groaned, dragging my feet to the door. Standing in the hallway, looking completely out of place in my dingy Brooklyn building, was Harvey Vance. Harvey was Manhattan's most feared family law attorney. He wore a three-piece suit that probably cost more than my building's annual rent, had the sharp, predatory cheekbones of a medieval vampire, and possessed a personality so incredibly toxic that we had instantly become best friends. He didn't just win cases, he emotionally destroyed opposing counsel for sport. You look like a corpse that was dressed in the dark, Harvey greeted me, sweeping past me into the apartment. He placed 2 iced lattes on the counter. I saw your comment on Instagram, subtle, I like it. Have they blocked you yet? Give it an hour, I yawned, taking a latte. Why are you here, Harvey? I'm technically unemployed and in my salted fish era. House calls cost extra. Harvey smirked, pulling a thick manila folder from his leather briefcase and tossing it onto my coffee table. Julian formally served the custody papers to my office this morning. It's hilarious. You have to read it. Malcolm Price drafted it, and you can practically smell the cheap cologne and masculine insecurity on the paper. I slumped onto the sofa, letting Harvey summarize. They're painting you as a destitute, emotionally unstable Omega who severed the bond in a fit of hysterical jealousy, Harvey said, his eyes gleaming with malicious joy. Julian is arguing that you have no income, no assets, and no capability to provide for Noah. Furthermore, Caleb is listed as a character witness, claiming they have a billionaire benefactor ready to provide Noah with the best education and lifestyle money can buy. Ah yes, a mysterious sugar daddy, I mused, taking a slow sip of my coffee. Did Caleb happen to mention a name? Harvey flipped a page. Richard Sterling. Texas oil money supposedly. Recently expanded into New York real estate. According to the filing, Mr. Sterling is so taken with Caleb's pure spirit that he's offering to practically adopt him and back Julian's legal fees. I paused. I blinked once, twice, then I threw my head back and let out a genuine, breathless laugh. It was so loud it startled Noah, who dropped his toy. Richard Sterling, I wheezed, wiping a tear from my eye. He's flexing, Richard Sterling. Harvey raised an eyebrow, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. I take it you know him. Harvey, I sighed, still chuckling as I walked over to the closet to grab my heavy Pelican laptop case. Richard Sterling is a regional branch manager for one of my family's subsidiary holdings. My mother demoted him 3 years ago because he expensed too many golf trips. He's essentially a middle manager who got lucky. Harvey's predatory smile slowly stretched across his face, revealing a terrifying amount of teeth. Oh, this is going to be spectacular. So, what's the play, Liam? Are we finally taking off the mask? Are you going to crush your ex-husband's little Wall Street sandcastle? I set the laptop on the coffee table and popped the latches. The screen booted up, illuminating the faded Hello Kitty stickers on the keyboard. Not yet, I said, my fingers flying over the keys as lines of code began reflecting in my eyes. If you squash a bug while it's on the ground, nobody notices. You have to let them fly up high first. Let Caleb flaunt his borrowed Hamptons house. Let Julian think he's won. I'm just going to make a few minor adjustments to Julian's core trading algorithms first. Harvey leaned back, crossing his legs, looking like a kid on Christmas morning. I love it when you get vindictive. It's my favorite aesthetic. I'm not vindictive, Harvey, I corrected mildly, executing a backdoor override command I had coded into Julian's company servers a year ago when I was bored. I'm just very tired of their noise. And it's time to cut the Wi-Fi. People think dismantling a multi-billion-dollar Wall Street empire requires a syndicate of international hackers, encrypted dark webs, and dramatic countdown timers. It doesn't. It really just takes a severely annoyed Omega in fuzzy socks, a half-eaten bag of jalapeno Cheetos, and a revoked API key. Sitting cross-legged on my couch, I stared at the lines of code scrolling across my battered laptop screen. 2 years ago, when I was heavily pregnant and suffering from chronic insomnia, Julian was stressed about Blackwood Financial's predictive trading software lagging behind the market. To get him to stop pacing the penthouse so I could sleep, I had rewritten his entire core algorithm over a weekend. I registered the intellectual property under a dummy shell corporation, licensed it to his firm for a nominal fee of $1, and then went back to bed. Julian, in his infinite alpha arrogance, never bothered to check who actually owned the code that made him his billions. He just assumed his IT department had a sudden stroke of genius. "All right, Noah," I said to my son, who was aggressively chewing on a rubber giraffe. "Let's see how Daddy's ex-husband handles a sudden drop in cognitive function." With my pinky finger, I casually hit the enter key. I didn't hack Blackwood Financial. Hacking is illegal, and more importantly, it requires effort. I simply terminated the licensing agreement, revoking their access to my proprietary algorithms and triggering an immediate, system-wide firewall block on their servers. I switched my screen to Bloomberg TV, popped a Cheeto into my mouth and waited. It took exactly 14 minutes. The breaking news ticker at the bottom of the screen suddenly flashed red. Blackwood Financial suffers catastrophic system failure trading HALTED. A breathless reporter appeared, stating that the firm's core algorithms had vanished into thin air, leaving their traders completely blind. The stock was currently plummeting faster than Julian's morals. My phone rang. It was Archer. "Liam, turn on the news. Julian's firm is imploding. They're saying some legendary cyber-terrorist group attacked them." "Terrorists? How dramatic," I yawned, wiping cheese dust on a napkin. "I just took my toys and went home. If he wants to use my code, he can pay the standard market rate, which for him is approximately $2 billion an hour." "Wait, you did this?" Archer choked. "I'm reclaiming my intellectual property," I corrected lazily. "Anyway, I have to go. I need to take a nap before the preliminary hearing this afternoon. Being a vindictive genius is exhausting." 3 hours later, I walked into the Manhattan family court flanked by Harvey Vance, who looked like a shark that had just smelled blood in the water. I was wearing an oversized beige cashmere sweater and slacks, the absolute epitome of unbothered cozy. Julian and Caleb were already seated at the opposing table with their lawyer, Malcolm Price. Julian looked like he had aged a decade since this morning. His tie was slightly crooked, his eyes were bloodshot, and his alpha scent practically reeked of panic and stale coffee. Caleb, however, was blissfully oblivious to his partner's financial preening in a tailored Gucci suit that he definitely couldn't afford. "Liam," Caleb purred as I sat down. He leaned across the aisle, his voice dripping with fake sympathy. "I'm so sorry it has to be this way. But don't worry, my new benefactor, Mr. Sterling, is very generous. We'll make sure Julian gives you a decent little allowance so you don't end up on the streets." I slowly blinked at him. "Cal, the only thing you've successfully secured in your entire life is a sockless loafer and a man who is currently sweating through his deodorant. Please be quiet. You're giving me a migraine." Caleb bristled, but before he could respond, Judge Castellano entered the room. The preliminary hearing was meant to establish temporary financial parameters and assess both parties' capabilities to provide for Noah. Malcolm Price stood up immediately, puffing out his chest. "Your Honor, this case is incredibly straightforward. My client, Julian Blackwood, is the CEO of a major financial institution. He can provide unparalleled stability. The respondent, Liam, is currently unemployed, has zero personal assets, and has spent the last 2 years functioning as a dependent house spouse. He has no means to support a child." Julian finally looked at me, a mixture of pleading and warning in his tired eyes. He really thought he had me cornered. Harvey stood up, slowly buttoning his suit jacket. He smiled, and it was a terrifying sight. "Your Honor, Mr. Price's assessment of my client's finances is frankly adorable. It is true that my client enjoys a leisurely lifestyle. He refers to himself as a salted fish. However, being lazy and being broke are two very different things." Harvey pulled a sleek black folder from his briefcase and handed it to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. "Just yesterday," Harvey continued, his voice echoing in the silent courtroom, "my client decided he was slightly bored, so he accepted a minor, 2-day freelance consulting contract to kill some time." Malcolm scoffed loudly. "Freelance consulting? What did he do?" "Design a bake sale flyer, Your Honor. A temporary gig doesn't prove financial stability." "Actually," Judge Castellano interrupted, adjusting his reading glasses as he stared at the document. He looked up, his expression completely blank. "This is a ratified contract with the United States Department of Defense for the complete restructuring of their naval cybersecurity grid. The courtroom went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Julian's head snapped toward me so fast I thought he might have given himself whiplash. The payout for this 2-day consultation, the judge read, clearing his throat, is $45 million. Paid in full yesterday. Caleb let out a sound like a strangled goose. 45 million. For 2 days. I leaned forward, resting my chin on my hand, looking directly at Julian's horrified pale face. I type very fast, I said softly. And unlike your firm's trading software, Julian, my code actually works. Now, are we done discussing my ability to buy my son diapers? Or do I need to casually acquire Google before dinner? Waking up before 9:00 a.m. should be classified as a violation of my basic human rights. It was the morning of the final custody hearing, and I was standing in front of my mirror, deeply resenting the tailored charcoal Tom Ford suit I was being forced to wear. Being a salted fish meant living a life of soft fabrics, elastic waistbands, and zero expectations. Having to dress up to financially and emotionally destroy my ex-husband felt like entirely too much work. I kissed a giggling Noah goodbye, handed him to the nanny, and dragged my feet down to the waiting black SUV. When I arrived at the Manhattan Family Court, the steps were swarming with reporters. Blackwood Financial's catastrophic stock plunge had dominated the news cycle for 3 days. The media was practically frothing at the mouth, trying to figure out how a multi-billion-dollar empire was currently trading at the price of a mediocre turkey sandwich. Harvey met me at the entrance, holding a venti iced Americano and vibrating with the dark, chaotic energy of a lawyer who is about to commit legal murder. You look entirely too relaxed for a man entering a custody battle, Harvey noted, adjusting his silk tie. I'm pacing myself. Breathing takes effort, I replied, suppressing a yawn. Let's just get this over with so I can go home and finish my K-drama. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was thick enough to cut with a knife. Judge Castellano sat at the bench, looking aggressively impatient. At the opposing table, Julian looked absolutely atrocious. His cheekbones were hollow, his skin had a grayish tint, and his alpha aura was so depleted he practically smelled like wet cardboard. He was a man watching his life's work evaporate into thin air, entirely unaware that the architect of his demise was sitting 10 feet away, complaining about the uncomfortable wooden chairs. Beside him, however, Caleb was a beacon of delusional radiance. He was wearing a blindingly white designer suit with a diamond brooch, looking like a freshly bleached pigeon. He was completely oblivious to the fact that his alpha was currently poorer than a college student with a crypto addiction. All right, let's conclude this circus, Judge Castellano sighed, rubbing his temples. Mr. Price, you have the floor. And I highly suggest you bring something more substantial than accusations of bad vibes this time. Malcolm Price stood up. He was sweating so profusely through his expensive suit that I felt a brief pang of sympathy for his dry cleaner. Your Honor, Malcolm began, his voice lacking its usual theatrical boom. Despite the recent, highly suspicious fluctuations in my client's corporate standing, Julian Blackwood remains a pillar of the financial community. The respondent, Liam, managed to secure a singular, lucky freelance contract, but a one-off payment does not equate to the generational stability, social standing, and expansive network that Julian can provide for the child. Harvey stood up, not even bothering to button his jacket. He leaned his hands on the table and smiled his terrifying shark smile. Generational stability, Harvey chuckled a dry, raspy sound, Your Honor, as of this morning's opening bell. Blackwood Financial is being investigated by the SEC for complete infrastructural collapse. My client's lucky contract currently makes him approximately $45 million wealthier than Mr. Blackwood, whose net worth is heavily tied up in stock that is currently worthless. Giving Julian custody for financial stability is like buying a ticket on the Titanic after it already hit the iceberg. Julian flinched visibly, burying his face in his hands. Furthermore, Harvey continued ruthlessly, my client has proven his undeniable genius and capability to provide. What has Julian proven? That he can't even keep his own company's servers online without outsourcing to anonymous third parties. Objection, Malcolm shouted, wiping his forehead with a handkerchief. Relevance. Overruled. The judge deadpanned, honestly. Mr. Price, I'm inclined to agree with Mr. Vance. Your client is on the verge of bankruptcy. Unless you have a magical money tree hidden in your briefcase, I am preparing to rule in favor of the respondent. Julian looked at Caleb in absolute panic. Caleb, however, simply patted Julian's arm with a condescendingly confident smile. He stood up, whispering frantically into Malcolm's ear. Malcolm hesitated, his eyes widening, before he nodded and stood up taller, clearing his throat loudly. Your Honor, we do not need a magical money tree, Malcolm announced, sudden desperation making his voice crack. Because we have something better. A guarantor. The courtroom went still. I tilted my head, resting my cheek on my fist. Here it comes. We have a character witness and financial sponsor who has agreed to establish an irrevocable $50 million trust for the child, provided full custody is awarded to my client, Malcolm declared. This individual has also formally offered to adopt Mr. Caleb into his prestigious family, effectively merging their assets. Caleb turned to look at me across the aisle. His eyes were wide with manic, vindictive triumph. It's over, Liam. He mouthed silently, his chest puffed out. You're nothing. Your Honor, Malcolm shouted, his confidence fully restored. I call to the stand a titan of global industry, a billionaire who recognizes the injustice being done to this alpha-omega pair. I call Mr. Richard Sterling. A collective gasp echoed through the gallery. The press reporters in the back row began typing frantically on their laptops. Richard Sterling was a legend in the oil and real estate sectors. To have him step into a petty family court dispute was like dropping a nuclear bomb on a knife fight. Oh, thank God, I muttered under my breath, slumping further down in my chair. I was starting to fall asleep. You ready for the show? Harvey whispered, his eyes gleaming with malicious delight. Just wake me up when it's the good part, I whispered back. The heavy, double mahogany doors at the back of the courtroom slowly clicked open. Caleb stood up, beaming with tears of joy in his eyes, ready to welcome his billionaire savior. Julian let out a massive sigh of relief, believing his salvation had finally arrived. I just blinked lazily, watching the doors swing wide, waiting for my mother's middle manager to step onto the stage. The heavy mahogany doors didn't just open, they were shoved wide by two men built like heavily armored refrigerators, wearing custom earpieces. The courtroom, already tense, fell into suffocating, dead silence. Even the aggressive typing of the reporters in the back row abruptly stopped. Through the doorway stepped Richard Sterling. He looked exactly like the tabloids painted him, an imposing, silver-haired titan of industry with the sharp, merciless gaze of a man who bought and sold countries for sport. He wore a bespoke navy pinstripe suit, leaning slightly on a silver-handled cane that was entirely for aesthetics. To the rest of the room, he was a god descending from Olympus. To me, he was just Dick from accounting who once cried in the break room because my mother yelled at him over a typo in a quarterly report. Caleb practically vibrated out of his chair. He looked like he was about to ascend to heaven. He immediately pushed past Julian, his eyes brimming with practice, fragile tears of pure gratitude. He smoothed down his designer jacket, clearly preparing to throw himself at his billionaire savior. Mr. Sterling, Caleb gasped, his voice trembling with the perfect pitch of an innocent omega finally finding his protector. He stepped right into Sterling's path, holding out both hands. I am Caleb. I can never find the words to thank you enough for seeing the truth of our situation. For standing up against the malicious lies of move. Sterling didn't yell. He didn't even raise his voice. He simply delivered the single syllable with the casual, icy annoyance of a man swatting a particularly persistent mosquito. He didn't look at Caleb's outstretched hands. He didn't even make eye contact. He just kept walking, his cane clicking sharply against the marble floor. Caleb froze, his hand still suspended in the air, his tragic smile shattering like cheap glass. He stumbled backward as one of the refrigerator bodyguards casually nudged him out of the way. Julian, trying to salvage the situation and assert his own alpha dominance, stepped forward, buttoning his jacket. Richard, it's an honor. As the CEO of Blackwood Financial, I want to personally welcome. Quiet, Sterling snapped, finally looking at Julian. The look of sheer, unadulterated disdain on the older man's face was so potent it could have stripped paint off the walls. Julian's mouth snapped shut, his face flushing a deep, embarrassed crimson. Sterling walked right past the respondent's table, ignoring Malcolm Price, who was currently sweating so hard he looked like he had just run a marathon in a sauna. Sterling's sharp eyes scanned the room before finally landing on the back corner where I was slumped in my chair, resting my chin on my palm, desperately wishing I had brought a snack. The billionaire titan, the man Caleb had spent weeks bragging about on Instagram, the man Julian thought was going to save his bankrupt empire, marched straight toward me. When he reached our table, Harvey stood up, smirking like the devil himself. He casually leaned against the wooden barrier, crossing his arms to enjoy the front row seat to the carnage. I didn't stand up. I just tilted my head, looking up at Sterling through half-closed eyes. The entire courtroom collectively held its breath. You could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning. Julian and Caleb had turned around, watching the scene with growing, frantic confusion. Then, the unthinkable happened. Richard Sterling, the ruthless oil and real estate magnate, took off his expensive sunglasses, placed his silver cane against the table and bowed. He didn't just nod. He bent at the waist in a perfectly rigid, 90-degree bow of absolute submission. "Young Master Liam," Sterling said, his deep, booming voice echoing off the silent walls. It trembled slightly with unmistakable reverence. "I sincerely apologize for my tardiness. Traffic on the FDR Drive was highly inefficient." A collective, high-pitched ringing seemed to fill the room as 24 reporters simultaneously stopped breathing. Caleb let out a sound like a dying squeaky toy. "Young Master." I sighed a long, incredibly tired sound that came from the depths of my soul. I slowly sat up, rubbing my temples. "Richard, tell me you didn't fly all the way from Texas just for this theatrical nonsense." A simple email would have sufficed. Sterling straightened up, though he kept his head respectfully bowed. "I had no choice, young master. Madame practically threw me onto the private jet herself. She is incredibly displeased." "Let me guess," I deadpanned. "She finally read the tabloids." "Indeed, sir," Sterling replied, pulling a sleek, encrypted tablet from his inside pocket. "Madame instructed me to deliver a message verbatim. She says your little poor housewife roleplay is officially over. If you have finished playing house with these incompetent peasants, you are to pack up my grandson and come home immediately." Harvey let out a sudden, bark-like laugh, covering his mouth to hide his malicious grin. "Furthermore," Sterling continued, his voice projecting across the dead-silent room so clearly that even the judge looked paralyzed, "your primary offshore accounts have been unthawed. The board at the Silicon Valley conglomerate has been notified of your return, and they are preparing the executive suite. Madame also added that if you try to dodge the quarterly shareholder meeting again, she will personally come to New York and drag you back to Palo Alto by your ear." I groaned, burying my face in my hands. This was a nightmare. A literal nightmare. This is exactly why I ran away to Brooklyn. I muffled through my fingers. I just wanted to be a salted fish. I wanted to lie flat. Why is it so hard to just do nothing in this family? "Liam." The voice was so weak, so entirely broken, that I almost didn't recognize it. I looked up. Julian was clinging to his lawyer's table, his knuckles white. His face was the color of spoiled milk. He looked back and forth between me and the bowing billionaire, his brain visibly short-circuiting. "Young master," Julian rasped, his voice cracking. "Liam, what? What is he talking about? Who are you?" I looked at my ex-husband, the man who had bought me designer clothes thinking he was doing me a favor. The man who had cheated on me in his own hotel, thinking I had nowhere else to go. "Julian, please," I sighed, picking up my Hello Kitty laptop and sliding it into my bag. "You're embarrassing yourself. And honestly, you're embarrassing me by association. Did you really think my coding skills just magically fell out of the sky?" Caleb, completely unhinged, pointed a shaking finger at Sterling. But you're my benefactor. We talked on the phone. You said you were going to adopt me. You bought me the house in the Hamptons." Sterling finally looked back at Caleb, his expression shifting to one of profound pity. "You utter fool. The house in the Hamptons belongs to a subsidiary of the young master's family estate. I only authorized your temporary use of it so young Master Liam could have a quiet week without you buzzing around him. Your allowance was effectively severed an hour ago. You currently have $0 and a negative credit score." Caleb's knees buckled. He collapsed right there on the courtroom floor, sobbing hysterically into his fake Gucci suit. I slung my bag over my shoulder and stood up, smoothing out my oversized cashmere sweater. I looked up at Judge Castellana, who was staring at me like I had just grown a second head. "Your Honor," I said politely, offering a small lazy smile. "I believe the question of my financial stability has been adequately resolved. Now, if we are done here, I have a very cranky 2-month-old waiting for his afternoon nap. And honestly, so do I." The aftermath of the courtroom was less of a legal proceeding and more of a synchronized, high-society panic attack. Judge Castellano, finally realizing he was presiding over a domestic dispute involving a family that practically controlled the GDP of a small European nation, hastily struck his gavel. He granted me full, irrevocable custody of Noah, ordered Julian to pay my legal fees, and adjourned the court with the frantic speed of a man who desperately needed a stiff drink. Walking out of the courthouse, The paparazzi were already swarming like vultures. Only this time, they weren't screaming questions about my supposed mental instability or my destitute status. They were screaming about Silicon Valley, offshore shell companies, and the return of the prodigal tech heir. Richard Sterling handled them with the ruthless, terrifying efficiency of a man who was deeply afraid of my mother, parting the sea of flashing cameras so I could step into a waiting, bulletproof Maybach. I didn't even look back at Julian or Caleb. They were simply two bugs I had finally managed to scrape off my extremely expensive shoes. The truth of my identity was actually incredibly embarrassing. I wasn't some tragic, undercover prince testing the true love of the common folk. I was just profoundly, pathologically lazy. 3 years ago, when my mother, the terrifying matriarch of the largest tech conglomerate on the West Coast, told me it was time to step up as CEO, I panicked. The thought of 8:00 a.m. board meetings, corporate galas, and quarterly stress hives sounded like a medieval torture method. So, I faked an identity, ran away to New York, and married a moderately successful Wall Street alpha. Playing the quiet, submissive Omega House spouse was the perfect cover. I got to sleep until noon, wear comfortable sweatpants, and do absolutely nothing. I was living the peak salted fish lifestyle, and I would have gone away with it forever too, if Julian hadn't decided to cheat on me with a guy who thought sockless loafers were a personality trait. It took exactly 72 hours for Julian's world to completely disintegrate. Without my proprietary algorithms, Blackwood Financial didn't just crash, it evaporated. The SEC seized his remaining assets. His board of directors ousted him, and the banks foreclosed on his penthouse. As for Caleb, the moment Richard Sterling froze his allowance and seized the Hamptons house, Caleb found himself stranded on the side of the Montauk Highway with 2 fake Gucci suitcases and a negative credit score. He tried to call Julian, but Julian was too busy avoiding federal investigators to care about a green tea Omega who had cost him his entire empire. On Thursday afternoon, I was lounging on a gold-plated velvet sofa in the grand parlor of my family's actual Manhattan super penthouse. The space was roughly the size of an airplane hangar, with panoramic views of Central Park. "Mr. Liam," my newly reinstated head butler Thomas murmured, bowing slightly. "There is a gentleman at the private elevator. He looks entirely unkempt and is begging to see you. He says his name is Julian Blackwood." I sighed, slowly peeling a cucumber slice off my eye. "Did you sanitize him before letting him up? I don't want his failure getting in the carpets." "He is waiting in the vestibule, sir." I wrapped my silk robe tighter around myself and padded out to the foyer. Julian looked atrocious. His designer suit was wrinkled, his hair lacked its usual obnoxious amount of gel, and his alpha aura was completely suppressed. He looked like a wet rat that had just crawled out of a storm drain. "Liam," Julian gasped, falling to his knees the moment he saw me. He practically crawled forward, grabbing the hem of my robe. "Liam, please, I'm ruined. The company is gone. Everything is gone. I was a fool. Caleb meant nothing to me, I swear. It was a mistake." I looked down at him, my expression entirely blank. I didn't feel angry anymore. I didn't feel betrayed. I just felt an overwhelming sense of boredom. "Julian, please," I drawled, gently kicking my ankle to dislodge his hands from my silk robe. "Don't touch the fabric. It's custom loomed. And stop crying. It's making your face look puffy. And honestly, your bone structure isn't strong enough to support the bloat." "How could you do this?" he sobbed, his desperation making his voice crack. "You were my husband. You hid who you were. You destroyed my life." I chuckled, a low, dry sound that echoed in the marble foyer. "I didn't destroy your life, Julian. I literally did nothing. Doing things requires effort, and we both know how much I hate that. You destroyed your own life the second you decided to disrespect my peace and quiet. All I wanted was to take a nap on the day of my son's party, and you couldn't even let me have that." I leaned down, resting my chin in my hand, staring into his pathetic, red-rimmed eyes. "I'm not ruining you out of hate, Julian," I whispered sweetly. "I'm ruining you because you were inconvenient. Now, please leave. My son is sleeping, and your crying is frankly giving me a migraine." I stood up straight and snapped my fingers. 2 of the refrigerator-sized bodyguards immediately stepped out of the shadows, grabbing Julian by his armpits. "Wait, Liam. You can't do this. No one needs his alpha father," Julian screamed, his heels dragging across the imported marble floor as they hauled him toward the elevator. "Nowhere has a trust fund the size of a small country," I called back lazily, waving my hand. "He'll be fine. Enjoy the subway." The heavy elevator door slid shut, cutting off his wails. The silence that fell over the penthouse was absolutely magnificent. It sounded like victory. It sounded like peace. I turned around and walked back into the grand parlor. Noah was happily babbling in his custom-made, platinum-accented playpen, surrounded by 3 nannies who were currently debating the best classical music to play for his cognitive development. I sank back into the absurdly soft cushions of the gold-plated sofa, pulling a cashmere blanket over my legs. A maid immediately appeared, placing a bowl of freshly shelled sunflower seeds and a glass of chilled vintage champagne on the side table. I popped a sunflower seed into my mouth, opened my Hello Kitty laptop, and checked the latest stock plunge of Blackwood Financial just for a quick laugh. People always say money can't buy happiness. Those people are completely wrong. Money buys the ultimate privilege, the ability to lie flat, do absolutely nothing, and watch your enemies destroy themselves while you take a very, very long nap. I closed the laptop, pulled the blanket up to my chin, and finally went to sleep.